If you remember the show Mindhunter on Netflix, you may recall a strange scene in the first season. It's not a disturbing or terrifying one, unlike most of them in the show, but it really stuck with me through my whole watch through. And if you're like me, then this probably stuck out to you as well. Obviously, I can't show you the whole clip, but I can show you some shots of the scene and give you some context. At this point in the show, Holden Ford and Bill Tinch are building the behavioral unit, and they have hired a new agent, a sort of clean-shaven, innocent man named Greg. In order to see if Greg can handle interviewing serial killers, Holden tells Tinch that Greg is listening to the Bittaker Norris tape. It is kind of said offhand, and then Tinch and Holden continue talking about what's happening in the plot. However, the editing of the show dollies in on Greg with headphones on, and he's making faces of horror and disgust before he slams the headphones onto the desk, and he looks like he just escaped some terrifying event. And when I first watched this, I was with my friend, and I remember distinctly saying, "What the hell was he listening to?" And now, a few years later, diving into true crime and the less savory parts of history, a case in America has always popped up. A case that is related to that tape that we saw Greg listening to. That tape and that scene of Mindhunters was the recording of the monsters of the Toolbox Murders. The contents of we will discuss a little later. However, I will tell you that this reaction Greg made was justified. Every true crime has evil within its story, but when the motivations of jealousy, gratification, love, or monetary gains are not present, when does evil cross the line from nurture into nature? This is a story I cannot tell in good faith without giving you a content warning. Just imagine everything bad that would normally be in one. And when we have ended this story, I guarantee you're going to be begging for some motivation for why these crimes happened. And the true horror of this case is that there isn't. It was senseless, unapologetic violence. So let's start this story at the beginning. Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker was born on September 27, 1940, and immediately put up for adoption, which was a relatively short time. With an average childhood in California, he was your standard 50s greaser boy, a rebel without a cause. By his early teens, he would have had his first run-in with the law as he was sent to the California Youth Authority for car theft. When he was released, Bittaker chose to run away from his family, where he would go from a young punk to a career criminal. Over the next 15 years, Bittaker was in and out of prison for assault, burglary, and grand theft. He was diagnosed by a prison psychiatrist as being highly manipulative and as having considerable concealed hostility, meaning that he hid his anger and violent tendencies well behind a friendly persona. Then in 1974, Bittaker was once again arrested, but this time for a far more serious charge: assault with a deadly weapon, that he committed on a supermarket employee after stabbing the man in the chest, just barely missing his heart. After found guilty, Bittaker was sent to the California Men's Colony Prison in 1976, where the stars would align for him as he would meet his partner for his future disturbing actions. Roy Lewis Norris was born on February 5, 1948, and lived with his family occasionally, but was more often placed in the care of foster families. Norris allegedly suffered neglect by these families and sexual abuse by at least one. Norris dropped out of high school, briefly joined the Navy, and then was honorably discharged with a diagnosis of severe schizoid personality by military psychologists. In May of 1970, Norris was on bail for another offense when he violently attacked a female student with a rock on the campus of San Diego State University. Norris served almost 5 years at the Atascadero State Hospital, classified as a mentally disordered sex offender. but eventually Norris was released on probation in 1975. He was declared no further danger to others. 3 months later, he raped a 27-year-old woman after dragging her into some bushes. After being incarcerated again, he was then sent to the California Men's Colony in 1976. Sources conflict on how Bittaker and Norris first met in prison, but once they did, they both confided in each other their crimes and eventually their sick and twisted fantasies. Fantasizing about sexually assaulting and murdering teenage girls. Both men pledged that they would reunite once released, and planned to murder one girl of each teenage year, 13 through 19 years old. Bittaker was released in November of 1978, and Norris was released on January of 1979. And within a month, Norris raped a woman but wasn't immediately arrested for it. On the prowl again, as promised, Norris received a letter from Bittaker, and the pair met and began to put their plan from prison into action. Abducting teenage girls discreetly wouldn't be easy. They needed a suitable vehicle. Bittaker proposed a van and Norris put up the cash, and in February of 1979, Bittaker purchased a silver 1977 GMC Vandura. The passenger side sliding door would allow them to pull up to potential victims without having to slide the door all the way open. They nicknamed their van the Murder Mac. The pair picked up over 20 hitchhikers from February to June of 1979, but didn't assault these girls. Rather, these were practice runs. Scouting for secure locations, in late April of 1979, they found an isolated fire road in the San Gabriel Mountains. Bittaker snapped the lock on the entry gate with a crowbar and replaced it with his own. With a vehicle and a location, there was only one last part to the plan: what weapon the men would use. Again, sources are a little conflicted on what exactly was in the toolbox Norris and Bittaker used. To most of these sources, the men packed plastic tape, pliers, rope, knives, an ice pick, as well as a Polaroid camera and a tape recorder. The last two for the men to record their crimes, which we will revisit later. Between June and October of 1979, Bittaker and Norris preyed on girls hitchhiking. Sticking to their original plan, the men kidnapped and murdered Lucinda Lynn Schaefer, Andrea Joy Hall, Jackie Doris Gilliam, Jacqueline Leah Lamp, and finally Shirley Lynette Ledford. With some improvised changes to their plan, their hunting followed the same original idea. Kidnap a hitchhiker, take them to the mountain spot, and dispose of them off the mountain into the canyon. During these attacks, the men were both incredibly cruel and demented. After sifting through their accounts of what specifically they did to each of these women, I will spare you some of the more gruesome and repetitive acts they did on each victim. Instead, I wanted to share some of the most heartbreaking parts in their accounts. During the murder of Lucinda Lynn Schaefer, Lucinda at some point had asked Bittaker for a second to pray before they continued. Bittaker denied the request and took her life shortly after. When they had kidnapped Jackie Doris Gilliam, Bittaker for some reason forced Jackie to refer to him as her cousin. When Norris took the life of Andrea Joy Hall, he drove an ice pick through her ear into her brain, and even though she was instantly dead, Norris later recalled driving the ice pick through her other ear for no specific reason. However, by far the most gut-wrenching killing of all was of Shirley Lynette Ledford, but we won't go into details right now, as this killing would be the one that Bittaker and Norris recorded almost every second of, which would play into the investigation that led to their capture. In November of the same year of their crimes, Bittaker and Norris met with a friend they shared at the men's colony named Joseph Jackson. Here they told Joseph about their wicked acts, which made Joseph ended up going to his lawyer in an attempt to make sure he wasn't culpable of their crimes. The lawyer then informed the Redondo Beach police of the story. Joseph's accounts lined up with the missing person cases that were there. However, there was no proof that linked Bittaker or Norris to them, except for one lead that Detective Paul Bynum received in Joseph's story. Norris mentioned that one of the women they kidnapped they had pepper sprayed before taking her to the mountains, but for no discernible reason the two let this girl go. That story lined up with a case at the nearby Hermosa Beach where a woman had been pepper sprayed and before being left on the side of the road. Detective Bynum met the victim and asked what the two men looked like, and the victim described them as adult Caucasian males. Prepared for this statement, Bynum then presented both Norris and Bittaker's mugshots to the girl, who revealed it was them that committed the assault. Not soon after, warrants were issued, and while you would expect a massive manhunt like in other famous California serial killer cases, this one was relatively short. Bittaker and Norris had no idea of the walls closing in on them. Norris was the first to be detained, as a police tale saw Norris deal marijuana, which violated his parole. Bittaker was soon arrested as well, as police tales narrowed him into a motel in Hermosa Beach. There he had with him the driver's license of the released victim. He was swiftly arrested as well, all within a few days of this first lead. Once in custody, there was one final piece of evidence. The girl who was released had to identify the two in a police lineup, and without hesitation she immediately pointed them out. With the two incarcerated, the police searched the van, where the two kept their tools, souvenirs, Polaroid photos, and tape recordings. The last two things would paint an even more grisly picture than any of the Hermosa or Redondo Beach police could imagine. Their missing people were in the photos, and the voices on the tapes matched their demographics. Probably the most important piece of evidence came at a hefty cost. In order to positively ID the victims in the tape recordings, the police brought in the closest relatives to each girl and had them listen to the tapes to confirm that it was indeed their daughter's voice. Now, I am not a parent, but if I had to sit down and listen to a tape recording of the last minutes of my child's life before they are gruesomely murdered, I would be permanently scarred for the rest of my life, especially since I know what these parents had to listen to. Which brings us back to Shirley Lynette Ledford, the last victim. The reason I'm talking about it at this point in the story is because Shirley's attack was entirely recorded on tape, from the kidnapping to after her murder. And after she was killed, for some weird disturbed reason, Norris and Bittaker discarded her body on a front lawn in Hermosa Beach. This tape is probably the closest thing to pure evil I can imagine, and that's even considering the Leonard Lake tapes. It is an example of how sound before all else is what triggers a human's sense of fear. For when listening to the tape, the human mind has no choice but to visualize what is being heard. Now, before you get all eager to attempt to listen to the tape, I'm afraid that won't be possible. The Shirley Ledford tape has only been played a few times, once to identify Shirley, a few times by FBI investigators including the FBI Behavioral Unit, and one final time at Norris and Bittaker's trial. Other than that, the tape has never been digitally copied or uploaded to the internet. It has only been copied to another tape recording for the FBI, and that is all. However, a transcript of the tape is publicly available, and recreations of the tape can be found on the internet. The recreations are terrifying, and I mean, they're really upsetting as well. But I also read the transcript, and maybe if I was given the opportunity, I probably would listen to the original because it's so rare. But I also don't know out of respect for the victims. There are horrible things involving pliers and genitals on that tape that I might not have the stomach for listening to. And a really just sad part where Shirley screams for Bittaker and Norris to just kill her and be done with it. When the tape was played for the jury at the trial, many cried, burying their heads in their hands. Prosecutor Stephen Kay also broke down crying at the desk. But Bittaker sat in the courtroom smiling at everyone, not saying a word. Norris had testified Bittaker had amused himself by playing the tape while driving in the weeks before the arrest. And then on February 5th, Bittaker testified himself, denying rape and murder, stating he paid the girls for sex and permission to take their photographs. As you can imagine, both men were found guilty and the appeals for the death penalty were sent. The prosecutor, Stephen Kay, actually closed the trial with a powerful quote about his appeal for the two men's death. He said, "If the death penalty is not appropriate in this case, then when will it ever be?" In the end, Bittaker was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Norris avoided the death penalty in a trial by pleading guilty. He was sentenced to 45 years to life. However, Bittaker would escape the death penalty due to California's very strict process to employ it legally. Instead, Bittaker's life would end naturally in 2019, and Norris passed away shortly after due to health issues in 2020. In the aftermath, prosecutor Stephen Kay was interviewed by the Daily Breeze in 2009, where he admitted that for months after the trial, Stephen was haunted with nightmares. Specifically a recurring one where he would try to save Shirley from the van only for it to get away before he could open the doors. The bodies of the girls were partially recovered. During the investigation, Norris took the investigators to the canyon where the skeletal remains of Gilliam and Lamp were found beside a river at the bottom. However, Norris admitted in the canyon that the police could stop looking after that because there was no more remains for Hall or Schaefer. Norris made sure of it. Finally, the last thing to circle this video back around to the beginning is the tape. For more context for that scene in Mindhunters, the discovery of the Toolbox Murders' tape would have just been found and given to the behavioral unit, and Greg probably would have been the first FBI agent to be forced to listen to the recording. In real life, this was and still might be a thing. The Bittaker and Norris tape is used to expose agents to the cruel world of reality. It strips them of any innocence so that when faced with a future horrendous situation, they remain unfazed as they have experienced the worst of humanity already. Which probably explains this very human reaction the show depicted. I do not suggest seeking out a recreation of the Toolbox Murders tape. I regrettably sat through it thinking I was as brave as an FBI agent, and all I can say now is, nah, it's not worth it. I would suggest if you are interested in maybe reading the transcript, or maybe just reading one of the countless books on this criminal case. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you want to see more content, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see your name at the end of the video, why not become a channel member by clicking that link in the description. With that, this has been Pagan Valley, and I wish you all a good evening.